Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from Apocatastasis, an Institute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. Today, we're being rejoined by Dylan Moore, and we're being joined for the first time by Nima. And we're going to continue our talk of Carol Quigley's book, The Evolution of Civilization, and you can see our earlier talk in the description. One announcement concerning Apocatastasis before I ask Dylan and Nima to introduce themselves and also their work at Irida TV. One announcement concerning Apocatastasis is that in this month of March, this very day, in fact, I've just published an article entitled On the Nature of the Occupation and the Resistance of Schoolmen. And we're going to get very deep this spring in my writings and so forth on the nature of control on the society and the role that formal education plays in creating this situation and undoing it. And the first drop of that downpour is the article just mentioned. You can find that on our publication site, and I will link that below. So with the announcement from Apocatastasis end, scene 2. Dylan and Nima, please introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about Irida TV.
Absolutely. So I am Dylan Moore. I'm the main host of Irida TV, and my associate here, Nima Mahdjour, is the co-host and kind of the back brains of Irida. Well, I'm sure he'll have enough to say on that on his own, but the whole point of Irida TV, when we put this concept together, was to figure out how do we identify not only people who are making positive change in the world and amplify those people, but also how to help the listener understand that the listener has power within himself to, we're going to be talking about things kind of at the political level today, but even on your own financial level, even on your own relationship level, whatever the level is, understanding that you have a certain level of power that you're not accessing, I guess largely because you don't believe it, but it's more complicated to flesh out than just saying it that way. So how do we find people, amplify their voices that are actually creating positive change in the world? And furthermore, how do we have the listenership not just be able to take that and take it as something kind of like an intellectual hobby, but to say this is actual information that I can use to achieve similar or hopefully even better results. And the conversation today, evolution of civilizations, while it may at first sound like we're having kind of a historical hobby, this is interesting sort of conversation, that's really not the angle we're taking at this at all. We really want this to be a practical conversation, and in order for it to be practical, we need to understand that the forces of history aren't deterministic, and if they're not deterministic, where do we have the ability to make choice within it? And I think The Evolution of Civilizations by Carol Quigley really lays out a framework where that attitude could be addressed toward history. Nima, did you want to add anything that I missed to that?
I think you solved it all. Yeah, no.
Nice.
I don't know if you want introduction of myself.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
Nima Mahdjour. My background is in software development, and I used to live in California, co-founded a software company back then, sold it, moved to Florida just in time before 2020. And Dylan and I started podcasting, etc. in 2015. I ran into him on a forum on Free Domain Radio, and we talked about modern money theory, and Dylan had a lot of disagreements until he finally folded and agreed with me on everything.
I lost completely. Nima, it was like a total knockout in the boxing ring. Totally lost.
Free Domain, was that Stefan Molyneux's outfit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, I had called in on the show and sort of told him a little bit about modern monetary theory and why I think it has a lot of merit and validity. And Dylan was really interested, but he started asking a lot of good questions, started coming around to it. And that may be another topic for another time for us to explore. But like Dylan said, we're all about giving you useful information, right? So when you look at people talking about economics, for example, it's a lot of theory and a lot of posturing and just a lot of empty talk. But in my opinion, economics should help you make better decisions with your money. It's as simple as that. And so what economic theories help you do that best, and that kind of stuff is what we also talked about a lot, since that's sort of part of the origin story of how Dylan and I met, and it's a topic that we love talking about. Aside from evolution of civilizations quickly, which is another one of our favorite topics, obviously.
Great. Thank you for that, Nima. And I, of course, encourage everyone to check out Irida TV, and you can see that in the bubble down on the bottom of the screen there. So once again, for the audience, we have our previous discussion between just Dylan and myself in the description, and you can get up to speed altogether there. But in brief, when we began a number of these talks back in the autumn of last year, it became evident to me that there was an earlier book to Carroll Quigley. We all know Tragedy and Hope, and it was Dylan who informed me for the first time that there was a previous text that's really the matrix of understanding the more famous Tragedy and Hope text. And that's what we're digging through in these more recent episodes, including the previous one. And we get into Quigley's historiography, and historiography is really examining how history is written and the different worldviews and the different takes and interpretations that different scholars take on it through history, going back to St. Augustine and Ibn Khaldun and Herodotus, all the way up to, well, Quigley and modern fellows as well. So, Dylan and Nima, should we start here with the stages in order to, speaking of matrices and scaffolding, this might be a good place, the stages of...
Yeah, well, and then even before we get into that, just kind of setting a frame of what we're talking about here, and why do we care about Quigley? Like, why is this guy special over any other historian? And if I could sum it up as succinctly as I can, Quigley takes a scientific approach to history in a way that other historians just don't seem to be interested in. I mean, there's a part at the beginning of Evolution of Civilizations where Quigley even takes a crack at most historians, where he essentially says, okay, part of history is collecting facts, but there's an infinite number of facts. If we wanted to just sit in here and collect facts until the end of time, we would never collect them all. So if we're going to develop any sort of understanding, there has to be a point where we say, okay, we've collected enough facts, we need to analyze these facts. And there are a lot of historians that say it is impossible to draw principles from history utilizing the facts. And Quigley says to this, well, it's weird that they say this and don't stop being historians. Like, if you really don't believe that can happen, why are you even bothering being a historian to begin with? And then he turns around and says, okay, let me apply the scientific understanding. And he was a biochemistry major before he switched into history. So he came at this from a very hard science background. And how do I propose a scientific understanding in order, maybe predict is too strong of a word. We can't predict human action the same way we can predict, like, if I throw a rock, how that rock's going to move through space. But at a certain level, there are certain forces that we can predict. And based on these certain forces moving a certain way, we could say, okay, this organization, this country, this society or whatever appears to be doing this. They were doing that before. And based on the principle that we're about to talk about, we can predict this is going to happen if nobody addresses the problem.
Also, Quigley, in the beginning of his book, being a natural scientist or hard scientist, he talks about how the so-called hard sciences aren't really actually as hard as most people think they are. If you remember the example of the crystal quartz and how they grow. Just because social sciences aren't super hard, that doesn't mean you can't derive principles, basically.
Well, I want to take that crystal point a little further, because I think that this is an important part of understanding the frame that we're approaching this from. So Quigley, he mentioned this story like when he was a little kid, when he walked home from school, there was this area that I don't know if it was like from building a train track or whatever. There was a big pile of quartz crystals that had been like smashed up and thrown all over the ground. And he used to poke through the quartz crystals, and he was looking for one that looked like the one that he saw in his geology book, where, you know, a quartz crystal forms this specific geometry and this specific lattice. And, you know, you get this perfect picture of this perfect quartz crystal in the book. And he said, I can never find one that looked like the one in the book. They were all deformed to some level. And I mean, you would even have, for example, from this angle, it starts perfect. And in this angle, it starts perfect. But then they meet in the middle and they make something different. And the point that he wanted to make, as Nima exactly pointed out, is there's this theory of like, okay, here is what the thing is supposed to do when we write it down on paper versus what actually happens in reality. It's a little messier. Now, that doesn't mean that the theory doesn't mean anything or isn't worth anything, but we can't just look at the theory and expect it to completely explain what we bump into in reality. So I think, thank you for bringing that up, Nima. I think that's a super important point as we go into this conversation, that the hard sciences aren't as hard as they kind of make themselves out to be. And that when we're talking about these things in theory, it's important to remember nothing in theory, even the hard sciences, actualizes the way that the theory describes.
Mm.
Yeah, and definitely what calls itself science today, and it may consider themselves hard science, I think it should be very obvious to everyone how that's really not the case, how shoddy and ridiculous some of these theories are that are being presented at this point when it comes to pharmaceuticals and climate and all kinds of stuff. They're becoming more and more obviously stupid and shoddy
and institutionalized.
Exactly.
So, and I found as I was, yes, sir.
No, go for it.
Just briefly, I was just going to say that I found Quigley's initial comments about the natural sciences helpful as he segues in the opening 100 pages or so towards historiography, as he lays out, you know, some of the shortcomings of natural science, and also he points out how historians and certainly the general public have a very incomplete understanding of natural scientific laws and approaches and so forth. And I found that was a really good way to transition to some of his points about time periods and these distinctions that we make in history.
Yes. Well, and then as we transition to that, as we're talking about, you know, Quigley comes up with this, you know, hard science approach to history. I think Nima disagree. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think he only has one principle, and everything else is just a result of that one principle. And the one principle is that a societal organization, which can be anything, people coming together to do anything. It could be military, it could be intellectual, it could be religious, it could be economic, it could be, you know, the whole society wide, it could be super local, whatever it is. That societal organization is going to have an original purpose. And over time, through forces that we will discuss, that original purpose is going to be subsumed by vested interests that are more interested in keeping the status quo in order to serve themselves than they are in completing the original purpose of the organization. And the original purpose of the organization, at best, becomes secondary, and at worst can become contradictory to the purpose to the original purpose of the organization. An example would be, I mentioned this one in the last time I was on, the media, the news media. Well, you could say, what's the purpose of news media? And I know this is like an emotionally charged topic, but if we can kind of step back from it a little bit, you might come up with an explanation or description that the purpose of the news media is to inform the citizenry about what's happening in the society, right? I don't think that's a far cry. And if we look at what we have now, we have a news media that actively prevents society from having understanding about what's going on in society in order to achieve. I mean, we could sit here and contemplate what exactly it is that they're trying to achieve. But I think it's pretty clear that getting people the truth about what's going on in the society is not on that list anywhere. So Quigley's point is that any and every organization that humans get involved with, naturally, this is the natural law, naturally goes through this process. And there are 3 reasons. And this time, I'm not going to do it off the top of my head. I actually have the book in front of me.
There you go.
With the page. So, no, that's the instrument of expansion. Oh, somebody tap dance. I'm at the wrong page. I want to read that, but not yet.
Yeah, so as Dylan digs that up and...
I had a comment.
Yeah.
I think that theory about instruments turning into institutions is core and central. And another aspect that I don't think was covered on the last show about this is how Quigley divides society into 6 different dimensions of action, basically, right? And it goes from more concrete action to more abstract action, right? It goes from military to politics to economics to social to religious to intellectual, intellectual/scientific. And societies form instruments that can be broadly classified into any of these given categories. Not always exactly, but generally speaking, an organization that's economic is a corporation or a bank. An organization like a military is obviously military, a political party is political, and a nightclub is a social organization.
University would be intellectual.
Academy of Sciences, whatever. A church is religious. So then also why that's kind of helpful, I think, is we create all kinds of instruments within these different categories of society. But there's one type of instrument that is crucial to the advancement of civilization, which is the instrument of expansion. And the instrument of expansion can exist in any of these different categories, and it really defines the culture of the country. For example, the feudal manorial system was a military organization specifically, right? And that was the actually that wasn't a growth instrument yet, because it was just a mixture of gestation phase.
Yeah, I mean, it turned into a growth.
But then also, for example, in the Mesopotamian civilization, it was a religious instrument of growth that was dominant, which was a priesthood. And then today's financial /globalist capitalist world, it's an economic instrument of growth. And in classical society, for example, it was a political instrument of growth, was slavery. So that's just one thing I wanted to add to that.
Well, and then I think it's really important what Nima just brought up is that in Western society, in Western culture, modern Western culture, we're so used. If I say instrument of expansion, we automatically think economic and capitalism, right? And what Nima's pointing out is that, okay, yeah, that's what we do. And kind of all civilizations do that now over the world because that has been the winning ticket recently. But in the past, that was not necessarily the case. And if we get to this point in this conversation, we get to looking through Western civilization, we're going to see what the different instruments of expansion were. And yeah, I mean, it starts out like Nima said, at the military level. I found the page that I was looking for. And this is going to lead us straight into the instrument of expansion. So just understanding instruments in general is there are 3 reasons that an instrument eventually becomes institutionalized. The first is that the purpose of the organization, in this case to defend the society, he's given the case of an army, becomes no more than a secondary aim for everyone in the organization. Each person takes as his purpose the fulfilling of his duties, but soon leaves no one in the organization with the purpose of the organization as his primary purpose. Defense becomes secondary to discipline, keeping authority in the channels, feeding and paying the troops, providing supplies and intelligence, and keeping visiting congressmen or the people as a whole happy about the army, the personal comforts of the soldiers, and so on. So there's nobody in the society. I mean, to wrap that up, there's nobody in the organization that sits back and goes, hey, wait a minute. what is the original purpose of the army anyway, and are we moving toward or away from that purpose? The second reason why every instrument becomes an institution is that everyone in an organization is only human and has human weaknesses and ambitions, or at least has the human proclivity to see things from an egocentric point of view. Thus, in every organization, persons begin to seek their own advancements or to act for their own advantages. Promotions, decorations, increases in pay, better, easier assignments, and so on. And so more and more time and energy is focused on individual advancement over whatever the goal of the purpose of the organization is. And the third, this is kind of the crowning point, is that, and just to finalize that, all this reduces the time and energy devoted to the real goal of the organization. Finally, as a third reason why every instrument becomes an institution, the social conditions surrounding any such organization change in the course of time. Of course. When this happens, the organization must be changed to adapt itself to the conditions, or it will function with decreasing effectiveness. But the members of any organization generally resist such change. They have become vested interests. Having spent long periods learning to do things in a certain way or with certain equipment, they find it difficult to persuade themselves that different ways of doing things with different equipment have become necessary. And even if they do succeed in persuading themselves, they have considerable difficulty in training themselves to do the things in different ways or use different equipment. And then, he gives a bunch of examples that we don't have time to go through, but I think this is Nima's favorite quote, by the way. He summarizes it by saying that everything is too important to ever be entrusted to experts. Because every organization of such professionals and every established social organization becomes a vested interest institution, more concerned with its own efforts to maintain itself or advance its own interests than to achieve the purpose that the society expects it to achieve.
Listen to the experts, Dylan.
Yeah. Listen to the experts. As a consequence, old established armies and navies have frequently been defeated by new forces that have not yet become institutionalized. Thus, the Greeks defeated the Persians. The new Roman Navy defeated the Carthaginian fleet. The English defeated the French chivalry in the 100 Years' War. The English Navy, barely 75 years old, defeats the Spanish Armada. And then, there's a whole list of other examples. But as Nima pointed out, you can never trust an expert, because by definition, they're a vested interest. Right?
Yeah, I would say you can take expert input into consideration, but don't rely on them.
Well put. And to give a modern example, Nima was already touching on this earlier. Think of the climate garbage that's going on right now. I don't think it would be news to anybody listening to this to know that in order to get science grants, you have to come out with certain results. If you come out with a result that says CO2 induced climate change from humans is real, then you get money. If you come out with something that says it's not real, you don't get money. Right? So what a perfect example of, well, what's the purpose of science? To find the truth. No, now the purpose of science is to obscure the truth in order to get money from government grants. Yeah,
bingo. As our social credit score goes down, as we say this out loud,
right now,
it's a good point. That science has become a profit loss calculation, basically, and that's partly a result, in our opinion, of pragmatism, which is probably the only philosophical school that America has brought forth. But it leads to that. We read through a paper which pretty impressively predicts, because it was written earlier in the 90s, I think, this path towards it's just going to become a profit loss calculation. The truth is not going to matter.
Which is and I bet we could sit here and think of how institutions until we're blue in the face that applies to, right? I already talked about it with the media. It's science,
right. Institutional science. I'm thinking also education too. Getting back to pragmatism with John Dewey and the University of Chicago and all that. So the same example, or same
sports ball.
Sports ball.
Yeah, and that's one that Quigley uses, right?
Sports ball for an example, real quick, because I think this is so important, because this really, really shows that Quigley's onto something. That I'll get to the instrument of expansion, which is like the core concept of the big instrument of a civilization, right? But before we get to the big one, let's think of the smallest one we could possibly think of, which is sports ball, soccer, football, right? Now, quickly goes over the history of football. I don't even know if this history is accurate, but it still very cleanly elucidates the point, is that
I think it is accurate.
It is okay. The story of football, soccer, because it came from England, so I'm going to use the term football. I think was originally developed in Oxford. I might have the university wrong. In like the 18 whatevers, to get students at the university exercise. So the purpose of football, the original purpose of football, was to get students exercise who needed exercise. Mm-hmm. Well, naturally, if you're playing a competitive sport, things are going to get more competitive. And if we want to win, well, then it makes sense that we should invite a graduating senior to come back and coach. Well, if we're going to invite the graduating senior to come back and coach, we got to pay him. Well, in order to pay him, we got to charge money. Well, in order to charge money, we got to build a stadium. Well, if we're going to build a stadium, we need a lot of money. And so we need to charge a lot of money to get the stadium built. And then, in order to get people in the stadium, we need to find really good players to fill that stadium with. And by the time you get to the end of it, now the original purpose of football was to get students who needed exercise. Exercise turns into students who need exercise the most, sitting and watching students who need exercise the least. And the important part here is there is no point in that timeline where somebody sits back and goes, wait a minute, what's the purpose of football anyway? And when it comes to tragedy and hope, just the title, this is what I think he's talking about. The tragedy is that this is the natural force of history. The hope is, once we understand it, it no longer becomes deterministic because we can address it. Mm-hmm. So let's start to understand it, and let's move on to the instrument of expansion and get into the 7 stages of civilization.
Great.
So, page 132 of The Evolution of Civilizations. So,
and by the way, for the audience, this PDF of the book of Quigley's, this is in the description as well, so the audience can follow along. Go on there, Dylan, please.
All right. So, the instrument of expansion, Quigley differentiates a society from a civilization. And he says societies are cropping up all over the place. You know, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of societies over history. Civilizations, conservatively, there's 12. Liberally, maybe there's 24. However many it is, there's like orders of magnitude less than the number of societies. So what defines a civilization different from a society? The civilization is a society that has a specific instrument that causes the society to expand. And this instrument has to have 3 core traits. The first is the society must be organized in such a way that it has an incentive to invent new ways of doing things. The second is it must be organized in such a way that somewhere in the society there is an accumulation of surplus. That is, some persons in the society control more wealth than they wish to consume immediately. This is so important. And he makes an emphasis in other places of the book that this is so important that somebody has more wealth than they can consume immediately, that even if some people don't have enough wealth to maintain a normal standard of living, if you took the wealth from the people who do have it and give it to the people who don't have it, you destroy the chances of civilization because you don't have anybody saving any wealth. Mm-hmm. And then the third, it must be organized in such a way that the surplus that's being accumulated gets used to pay or to utilize the new inventions. When we take all these 3 things together, we get the instrument of expansion. And it can be shortened down to say there has to be invention, there has to be savings, and there has to be investment. Mm-hmm. Now that we're going to talk about the 7 stages, everything hinges on what exactly is happening with that instrument of expansion. Nima, did you have anything on instrument of expansion before we go to 7 stages?
No, I think like you said, those 3 components are critical. I was just thinking, I was trying to figure out a way to explain it more abstractly. Why are these things important? Why is savings important? Because savings means that somebody has the ability to put people in lines of work that have nothing to do with hand-to-mouth consumption, but rather with building machinery, computers, etc. But that person needs to have that power for whatever reason. In today's world, it's because you have a bunch of money in your bank account. In the Mesopotamian priesthood system, it was because you were able to predict where the stars and the moon and what they do and floods, etc. So for whatever reason, people associate a privileged position with whatever it is that you're doing or the wealth that you accumulate, and you're able to spend those resources on something. Number one, of course, if you only have savings, but nobody's invented anything, then you can't do anything. So yeah, you do need the invention. You do need that, I guess in today's world, it would be scientific, academic, or what they're supposed to do technically, the inventions. And you need to have the risk takers who take the initiative to deploy that surplus towards the invention. You can have people inventing stuff in their own cellar, but if you don't have someone to take risk to scale it, then it's not going to be relevant to this civilization, society. By the way, I have a chart that I can pull up while you talk about the stages, if I can present that.
Yes, sir. And on this recording platform on the bottom, you should have that option where it says present, and then just click it. And then I think I have to just double click it on my end here, but we'll get it right up there.
Okay, I got it up here. Okay, this is the one I want to show. Okay, share.
There we go. And it should be coming up momentarily now.
Okay. So here are the 7 stages of civilization. We've got mixture, gestation, expansion, age of conflict, universal empire, decay, and invasion. So what do all these mean? If we look at these from the standpoint of the instrument of expansion, we start with the fact, okay, there's no civilizations. How do we get one from having none? If a society doesn't have the 3 components that we talked about before, what you are looking for is that 2 societies bump into each other in such, usually this is in such a way where it's not like one society enslaves the other. It's where they more or less are able to commingle and they intermarry. And once they intermarry, there becomes a question of what culture are we going to pass down to the kids? And this provides an opportunity for the culture to change. Once the culture changes, if by accident an instrument of expansion is created, we now have the possibility for a civilization to occur. So in this first part of mixture, we're really talking about where two or more societies meet to start churning out something new. Now, an example of this would be in ancient Sumeria. This was definitely more than 2 people because ancient Sumeria is kind of like this middle disk of the Afro-Eurasian continent landmass where everybody meets in the middle. Like Nima was just alluding to at the beginning, when people were originally organized in Neolithic garden cultures, that agriculture had been figured out, but they would deplete the soil. Mm-hmm. So the early civilizations started to grow on the river deltas because you would have the flooding that replenished the life-giving quality of the soil. However, there's also a danger to the flood, which it'll kill you, right? So being able to predict the flood is a huge deal. And it appears that 5,000 years, 6,000, whatever it was, years ago, that the Sumerian priesthood made a connection to say, hey, the stars give us an idea of when the floods will happen. Now, of course, instead of sharing the information, they kept it a secret and they said, the gods will tell us when the floods are going to happen. And they'll only tell us if we make the proper sacrifice. We don't get to make the proper sacrifice. You give us tribute. Mm-hmm. So, and quickly points out that even the most unbelieving person would be convinced if you just got it right once. Mm-hmm. Right? So the surplus, in this case, went to a religious institution, the priesthood. And initially, the priesthood took that and reinvested it into irrigation. Oh, but I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So we're talking about mixture. So the mixture is these multiple peoples coming into ancient Sumeria that led to this priesthood doing things the way they did in the first place, right? Another example would be Western civilization. After the fall of the Roman Empire, you had what remained of the Romans mixing with the Germanic invading tribes, right? So mixture, I'm not going to say it's a boring phase. The most boring is gestation, which is number 2. It's not, but it's one of the more boring phases because this is kind of like, rolling. How many times are we going to roll the dice of these these societies mixing until one of them comes up with the instrument of expansion? Now, when one of them does, we move into phase 2, which is gestation, which is going back to the fall of the Roman Empire meets the Germanic invaders. There's some time for the two to start mixing together to actually foment the new instrument of expansion that's coming forth.
Right. And gestation, the insert expansion is forming. It's not fully formed yet, right?
Yeah.
But it is in the process of forming.
I think he says in the book that it appears as if nothing is happening, but it's almost fermenting like in bread or in beer. There's work going on beneath the scenes. Yes.
Absolutely. And it's typically a, in quotes, boring period of history because, as I just said, nothing appears to be happening. But the explosion we get happens when the age of expansion occurs. And this is when we can kind of officially say we have the instrument of expansion. We've invented it. People are using it. It's working, right? And there's 4 things that Quigley points out that show that the instrument of expansion is actually doing what we described. The first is an increase in production of goods, eventually resulting in a better standard of living. 2 is increased society population, mostly because of a declining death rate. 3, increase in geographic extent of civilization. This is a period of exploration and colonization. And 4, an increase in knowledge. And I should have pulled it up. I'm just thinking about this right now. Some amateur YouTuber, historiographical YouTuber, was talking. I bumped into this video. He was talking about the initial Greek civilization, how it kind of comes around roughly at 800 BC, and between like 800 BC and 600 BC ish, you really see this expansion of Greek colonization. And he actually drew it on a map and showed how, like, okay, here's this red dot on this white map of Greece. It goes and spreads out to the whole Mediterranean and the Black Sea. And I was like, this is a perfect example. This is like a perfect visual of what Quigley's talking about. The fact that this is happening allows the population to really reap the benefits of the civilization. And as Quigley points out, they become accustomed to receiving those benefits. And I mentioned this before. I think a good way to think about this would be comparing the economy that the boomers inherited versus the economy that the Zoomers are inheriting right now. Which is, hey, I'm a boomer. I could go to high school, get a diploma, get a job, or go to college and get an even better job, and marry a wife, have 5 kids, and own a house and pay for everything. You, as a boomer, you got rewarded for participating in what the civilization told you to participate in. Yes. Fast forward to now, that's a joke. It's a complete joke, and all the Zoomers know it. You're punished largely for participating in the story that the boomers still, to a large extent, think still exists, right?
Well put.
So, sorry, was someone going to?
Oh no, I was just going to say that's well put, Dylan. That's well put there.
So this is often a period of democracy, scientific advancement, revolutionary political change. And what he means by that is where nothing was really happening in stage 2, which is gestation, it becomes a wildly different political situation once you get to stage 3. Geographic expansion also divides the civilization into 2 areas. There's the core, which is where the civilization occupied at the end of stage 2, and the periphery, where the civilization expands to into stage 3. This is going to become really important as we move through these stages. And the effects of the instrument of expansion beginning to institutionalize, first, the core becomes increasingly static and legalistic, and the peripheral areas begin to expand. Another way of saying that is that the core starts institutionalizing or starts going into stage 4 while the periphery is still in stage 3. So there's kind of a delay that happens. As a result, the periphery will often shortcut developments experienced by the core area. And by the end of stage 3, the periphery is wealthier and more powerful than the core areas. And quickly says...
Sounds like US versus Europe, basically.
Exactly. Exactly. And to finish this idea on expansion, the instrument of expansion officially institutionalizes when the rate of expansion begins to decrease. Not that it stops expanding, but that the rate begins to slow down. For math people, the second derivative becomes negative. And that starts to lead us into the age of conflict. Nima, did you have anything to say about the age of expansion before I move into conflict?
Well, just that the critical factor of this age of expansion petrifying into... So the reason why we move into the age of conflict is because the instrument of expansion institutionalizes.
Yes.
And we explained earlier what that means with the examples of football and this and that. But the same thing applies to this instrument of expansion, which consists of saving, invention, and investment. It starts to institutionalize, and the benefits stop accruing to the population at large and start being amassed within certain, monopolies or oligopolies at the very least. Kind of like what we see with today's banking system, basically.
Well, and then let's go along that vein with the same Sumerian example. Is that when we said the instrument of expansion was the Sumerian priesthood gaining a surplus and then reinvesting that into the community. For example, irrigation, which will allow you to grow more food, which allows you to save a bigger surplus, allows you to invest in more things like irrigation. Well, at some point, the priesthood starts spending it on themselves. I need more slaves. I need more wives. I need ziggurats. I need, we need to have parties where we have fancy hats. I don't know if they had fancy hats in ancient Samaria, but we need parties where we have fancy hats to see who is the highest in all this sort of stuff where you're clearly developing a vested interest, and the people who are still paying the taxes, who are still applying the tribute, are not getting the reward, or I should say they're getting a diminishing effect of what they've been paying, and they've been grown like this. The society, the civilization was structured around the idea that you get rewarded for participating in this. Let's take Rome.
Rome,
right?
Yeah, perfect. That comes to mind. Yes.
So the Roman idea, which Rome isn't this civilization, Rome ends up conquering classical civilization. But what's going on in Rome, originally the institution of expansion was slavery. So if I'm a land owner and I've got 20 slaves, I would work out in the fields with my slaves to improve my crops, and the surplus from the crops would go to me. So the slave owner holds the surplus that could be reinvested. And furthermore, in order to be eligible for military service, I had to be a property owner. Now we fast forward into like 100 BC area time frame, where the military changes and anybody can join the military. People become more devoted to the general than they are to the Roman ideal. They go off onto these military campaigns. Meanwhile, back at home, things are institutionalizing, and these military guys come home and find out, oh, by the way, you couldn't pay your bills, and we sold off the family farm. Mm-hmm. Now they become destitute, and then these big latifundia, gobbled up by the equestrian class and the praetorian class, are now managed by absentee managers, absentee owners that have managers on site. Now the absentee the manager working for the absentee owner is not so concerned about maximizing output as he is about standardizing output, because if he has a really good year, Well, that just becomes the baseline that the owner expects to come from the farm. So he's going, no. I want to minimize a good year. So when a bad year happens, it looks like I get the same output. Well, what better description do you want of something it's institutionalizing, right? So more and more about the society is, okay, if I'm a Roman and I want to participate in the growth of society that was taught to me through like the mythology of Cincinnatus from 516 BC or whatever it was, that Cincinnatus supposedly was alive and became dictator for 16 days and gave up his power. And, that there's this old ideal that we aspire to. Well, it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get rewarded for participating in that old ideal anymore. So whatever the instrument is, we see examples of it institutionalizing. And once it institutionalizes, we now enter the age of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So the age of conflict, this is stage 4. We have a declining rate of expansion like we talked about before. And now, and this is also a period of growing, in quotes, tension of evolution and class conflicts, especially in the core area. So this is the vested interests, usually a minority vested interest versus the, unwashed masses. And the tension of evolution in this case is a conflict between a society adapted to expansion and the vested interests controlling the uninvested surplus of the institution of expansion who fear social change more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, hey, we're the masses. We want access to this uninvested surplus that we had, 100 years ago. And the vested interests are going, we don't want anything to change. And you guys are scaring us.
Mm-hmm.
Which lead us to increasingly frequent and increasingly violent imperialistic wars. And I think this is where we're going to start seeing the correlations to modern day, growing irrationality, pessimism, superstitions, and otherworldliness.
Mm-hmm.
My criticism of the rapture is coming to mind as I talk about that right now.
Also, I think you mentioned it already, but just to emphasize, one of the big characteristics of the age of conflict is that all the things that proliferated during the age of expansion are beginning to get restricted. And we see this today. It used to be, the 1800s, 1900s, there was nothing was impossible. The craziest things we could do. We could build a dam. We could build a railroad. We could dig up trenches here and there. And now in today's society,
you can't cut down a tree without a permit.
Right. So the ideology that is being peddled by the institutionalized classes is that we need less of everything. We need less growth because it harms the environment. We need less information because misinformation is all over and it's dangerous. We need less actual science, apparently. Instead, we just do infomercials for corporate pharma. It's less and less and less of everything. So that's just, and the growth rate, like you said, the growth rate slows down. And that's kind of been the case since 2001 in the West, that there's been very sluggish growth rates. The US, since Trump got elected, it sort of turned it around a little bit because there's some resistance, and we probably get into that if we have time later on. But generally speaking, the growth rates have become pretty sluggish.
And I'm also struck as I happen to be teaching some of our young ones this time period with the Roman Empire in the 4th century. Now, Quigley talks about Adrianople in the 370s, this battle between the old Roman legions and how it doesn't adapt to the Gothic or the Visigothic cavalry, and they're just completely bowled over. And that whole time period, you see this shift, just like Nima says. Nowadays, with the economy, kind of enters into this conservative spirit. Likewise, with the Romans in the 4th century, you have literally the weapons start getting longer. The psychology is changing, so the weapons get longer, the armor gets heavier, the fortifications go from being wood and temporary because you're moving around to being
stone castles,
yeah, and it starts smelling and sounding very medieval because the spirit has has become static and conservative, and it is no longer expanding.
Well, yeah, and I mean, at that point, we're getting close to the Roman Empire falling and having the mixture start for Western civilization because you're so late in the game. I mean, we're so late in the time frame.
And if you want to continue it just briefly, if you take the idea of Byzantium being being Rome, that static spirit continues to ossify in the next 200-300 years in the Byzantine Roman army, and then it becomes a parasite on top of the Turks and the Syrians and so forth. So by the time you have Islam, people are very happy to be free of the Byzantines that were just stealing all their stuff for their army. Completely.
Well, then Islam, a brand new civilization, comes up against this old civilization that's already institutionalized, and they just take them out.
yeah, exactly. And they have that hungry spirit. So the Muslims have that hungry spirit that the Roman legions had, however many hundred years before,
700 years prior. Yeah. Moving on, here's an important point. I mentioned this before. Quickly points out that all programs for sharing surplus of the few among the disconnected are discontented. So, okay, we have identified that there's a few there's the haves and the have-nots, and we're going to take from the haves and give it to the have-nots. He says this is worse than useless because since expansion can only be resumed by fixing the three necessary components of the instrument of expansion, and the dissipation of these surpluses won't provide the solution to any of these. And in fact, it's taking savings that could have been used for reinvention and just throwing it away to consumption. And he also points out that part of the problem, and this is the hope, this is the thing that me and Nima are trying to express here, is he says usually there is a majority of the frustrated struggling against the minority of the vested interests, and although usually neither side has any clear idea of the real issues at stake or what it would take to have a workable solution to the crisis. Right? So they're just bouncing around, not really having any idea what's going on. But the fact that we can read this book and have an analysis and have an idea of what's going on gives us a possibility to talk about a real solution.
Another thing to mention about the age of conflict is whatever growth system we had in the expansion phase, it petrifies into a monopolistic system. So in Western society, the first expansion phase was commercial capitalism. During the conflict, it petrifies into mercantilism, and the political unit that is trying to achieve the universal empire, which will be the next phase, tries to take over state mercantilism. And then
municipal mercantilism. I just read through it. Municipal's first state is part of the second phase.
Right. So was there two ages of conflict, one after each of those phases?
Yeah. So it was we had feudalism as the first instrument of expansion, followed by municipal mercantilism, which was the institution of that expansion, institutionalization of that instrument. That was attempted to be conquered by England. And then we had, I think you said commercial capitalism arise from that. And that turned into state mercantilism, of which Napoleon was the attempted universal empire. And that gets replaced by industrial capitalism, which institutionalizes into monopoly capitalism.
Exactly. Industrial capitalism turns to finance capitalism, turns to monopoly capitalism. And then we have another age of conflict, which was world wars, the first, second world war. And then we have the globalist capitalist system, which started in 1945. Maybe we can get into this in more detail. I just want to explain the general concept. Because before we started this call, I didn't know I was going to join today, but I started putting together a chart that lays this out, and I'm still kind of semi-working on this. Maybe I can pull it up later. But yeah, every one of these types of capitalisms petrifies into some sort of institutionalized capitalism. And currently, I would argue that we're going into something that I would call, I don't know if anyone else has called, but I would call it a data monopoly capitalism, because the accumulation of data has become the prime obsession of the powers that be, and not just data that's required to manufacture and to perform well, because this was the essence of finance capitalism, was basically all about data, because in finance capitalism, you succeed from the profits from buying and selling claims to future money flows, aka bonds and stocks. And to succeed there, you need to be able to crunch data and predict things. So that's specific data on a specific level. Now I would argue that system has petrified and institutionalized into this obsessive data collection of every single data point about every individual on planet Earth. Completely creepy and completely insane, and not sustainable, in my opinion. But just wanted to point out that every time during the conflict phase, we have a petrification, institutionalization of the capitalist system, or of whatever the growth system is in the given civilization. The West, it's been capitalism, and then a political unit trying to take over that monopolized, institutionalized system, which in today's world is the global technocrats, mostly Western Americans, trying to take over the system of globalism by creating a global government.
And ironically, as you point out, with the ossification and the decomposition, with like the information economy, which is predicated on presumably at one point accurate information in order to make these predictions. Now, as it ossifies, it becomes censorious. It becomes deplatforming. It becomes obsessed with controlling, trying to control narratives, and it becomes an enemy, like we've seen so much in this episode here, of what it was, what made it powerful to begin with, of the spirit that made it powerful to begin with. So vibrant, dynamic exchange of ideas and monitoring of those ideas becomes the total control of the ideas, and ends up killing the baby in the cradle.
Exactly, because the expansion phase, capitalism tends to increase the amount of everything: supply of goods, supply of information, supply of everything, and that ends up accruing to the masses over time. And the people controlling the instrument of expansion start becoming less and less powerful vis-a-vis the class. You have a middle class emerging. You have just, ordinary people succeeding in that society, and the people who run the instrument of expansion, who run the relevant institutions that are responsible for savings, investment, and invention, they don't like that. They don't like to see people rising up closer to their level. So that's why in the conflict phase, in every conflict phase, we always see restriction of. So they always try to restrict everything. And that's the mantra of today: restrict, restrict, restrict.
Quigley puts it that the expansion phase of any capitalistic part of society is we make more money by making more goods. And the institutionalized phase is we make more money by restricting the flow of goods. Which is exactly what Nima was pointing out. Yeah.
Exactly.
I want to get to imperialist wars and irrationality. And also important part to point out, the age of conflict is the most complex and therefore the most interesting phase of these 7 stages. So stage 4 is a period of imperialist wars and irrationality supported for reasons that are usually different for the different social classes. For the masses of people who don't have any vested interest in the existing institution, engaging in imperialist wars is a job. Like this is my only way to move up the ladder, because participating in the society doesn't do it anymore. So unable to get ahead by other means, they seek to get ahead by political action, and above all, taking wealth from their political neighbors. At the same time, they turn to irrationality to compensate for the growing insecurity of life, for the chronic economic depression, for growing bitterness and dangers of class struggles, and for growing social disruption and insecurity from the imperialist wars. Now, here's where let's start hitting some nerves. This is generally a period of gambling, use of narcotics or intoxicants, obsessions with sex, frequently as perversion, increasing crime, growing numbers of neurotics and psychotics, and a growing obsession with death in the hereafter. Did I just describe the current situation?
Fair enough. Yes.
Did I just freaking describe the current situation? And he hadn't. Oh, the example was later. I was reading through this yesterday to get ready for the call. I remember when we get to Western civilization, when he talks about the first age of conflict back in, we're talking like 1270 AD, that one of the examples of growing irrationality were the flagellants. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Yes. These wandering
the monks that
penitents
would whip themselves.
Yes.
In order to get right with God or whatever. This is a perfect example of moving toward irrationality, becoming obsessed with death and the hereafter. I made fun of the rapturists. I will continue to make fun of the rapturists because the rapture is essentially an idea that it's irrational and it's an obsession with death and the hereafter, which is to say, I do not need to participate in society because I have this magic switch that happened in my mind that's going to save me and remove me from it, from the consequences of it. And it, I mean, how did he put it? It's it's help from the growing disruption and insecurity from imperialist wars. Yeah, the insecurity of society, they're dealing with it. These rapturists are dealing with it by just saying, well, some magic thing's going to happen that's going to take me out of it and save me from all of it. So the vested now that's the masses. The vested interests encourage the growth of imperialist wars and irrationality because both serve to divert the discontent of the masses away from the vested interests. Accordingly, some of defenders of vested interests divert a certain part of their surplus to create instruments of class oppression, instruments of imperialist wars, and instruments of irrationality. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty.
Yes.
In the current state of affairs right now, can you think of an instrument of class oppression, an instrument of imperialist war, or an instrument of irrationality?
ADL, U.S. military, the media.
The media. Yeah, I was going to say the media. Yes.
So, and I think the ADL is going to be a perfect example of what I'm about to say here. Once these instruments are created and begin to become institutions of class oppression, institutions of imperialist wars, and institutions of irrationality, the chances of an instrument or an institution of expansion being reformed back into an instrument of expansion become almost nil. This is an important, highly important point that I try to emphasize to people who are black-pilled. Who are these people running around going, Western civilization or America is showing the exact same signs when Rome was about to fall. It's all about to collapse. I don't think we're here yet. I do not think we're here yet. And let's take the ADL for example.
Okay.
I believe the ADL is a perfect example of an instrument of class oppression. Right? It's a way to divide classes. The ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center have been getting their fingers into training law enforcement. And they're training law enforcement with words and definitions that they made up for those words that are, repeating myself, they're made up. So, for example, I mean, this is going to go on YouTube. I want to be careful about, flagging the algorithm, but domestic, supremacists, right? A certain color of supremacist, a certain flavor of domestic something or other. The ADL is creating the definitions and training law enforcement to act based on the definitions that they've created. And what's important here is that, first of all, whether those definitions are good or bad is secondary to the fact that there's an instrument, there's an organization other than the government creating those definitions.
Yes.
Right? This is putting the power into the ADL. This is putting legislative power into the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I would say if we get to a point where that's fully institutionalized, where law enforcement, for example, doesn't go to the government for their definitions of anything at all. It doesn't go to the government for the training at all. It doesn't go to the population that is supposed to serve at all and say, how do we serve this population? It goes to the ADL for its definitions and its orders. At that point, we've entered the phase that Quigley's talking about here, and chances of reform are almost nil. I do not think we're there yet.
Just on that point about so-called law enforcement, I don't think it's just words, Dylan, but I know throughout these United States, many police departments, not the least of which is the New York City Police Department, actually send their hirelings to Israel to be trained by the IDF. The police in this country go over there to be trained. The neck on the knee, which was so prominent a few years ago.
It was an Israeli military tactic.
Yes, and I wonder, off the cuff, I wonder if the ADL was not involved in making those sister city agreements and those sister police department agreements and so forth. So I think it's more than just words.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the words go toward who do we put that neck pressure on?
Yes, bingo.
Here's someone who's identified as a domestic because they question the most amazing medical technology that has ever existed to treat the most horrible sickness that mankind has ever experienced. That person is questioning that, so put the Israeli Defense Force neck technique on them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So, is there anything? I mean, all this is good stuff, but this isn't a show about me just sitting here reading a book.
Well, just to add to that, because I was born and raised in Germany and grew up there, and I go back frequently. And so what it helps to identify patterns that are similar in different countries that are not necessarily apparent if you're only in one and the same country the whole time. So for example, what you just brought up, the incident of class oppression, calling people white supremacists, etc. Germany has that too now. I mean, it's been growing for a while. But this concept of dumping all kinds of dissident groups into one pot and declaring them, branding them evil and disgusting. Like it used to be in Germany when I was growing up in the 90s, it was the neo-Nazis that were obviously paid by the German, and run by German intelligence, run by the CIA ultimately. But yeah, that was the thing that we were supposed to be disgusted by. And then now it's everything that disagrees with global technocratic capitalism, basically. And so one of the words that they have added to that list is völkisch, which you couldn't really do here. But völkisch just means
populist.
Yeah. Well, yeah, or for the people.
Right.
Because no, populist in Germany you would call populist, but völkisch is more like it's a sentiment that you support your people, your society. That's now bad also. So the list of words that define who's evil grows and grows and grows, and they're all thrown the same. These are all in the minds of the sheeple. These are all part of the same pot. The neo-Nazis, the far right, the hardcore white supremacists, the völkisch people. So this is a method of class oppression where you increase the size of the enemy by just dumping all the different dissidents, Verschwörungstheoretiker or conspiracy theorists. That's now they are part of that group as well now. So to the undiscerning citizen who doesn't really dig much deeper into this, he just knows that he's supposed to be disgusted by all those people, to the same extent, basically.
And liking my neighbor is now equivalent, or liking the people who live here is now equivalent to being a neo-Nazi.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
There was more here that I wanted to flesh out because Quigley fleshes this idea out.
Sure.
So I pointed out that the instruments of class oppression, imperialist wars, and irrationality, once these become institutionalized, the old institution of expansion loses its privilege. And the institution of class oppression begins to control much of political power in the society. The institution of imperialist wars controls much of the military power in society. And the institution of irrationality controls much of the intellectual life in society. Now, I'm sure there's some black pillars who will jump up and down and say, yeah, see, we're already there. Again, going back to the ADL is not in a position where it could just tell the government to F off. Okay, we're not there yet. The institution of imperialist wars controls much of the military power in the society. Yes, we have a military-industrial complex who have great influence, but they're not the ones giving orders to generals. Right? That hasn't happened yet. The institution of irrationality controls much of intellectual life in society. I would say this is further developed, like between the media and the universities and the censorship on the internet. This is further developed, but at the same time, the circumvention to it, the resistance to it, is further developed, right? I mean, the fact that we're even having this conversation outside of this institution of irrationality is showing that, yes, that's further developed, but at the same time, they're kind of losing. So I would say this one, it's the worst and the best at the same time right now. They have more control, but they're in the process of losing it. So these three, which could be combined into two or one, they become dominant. And the group that formerly controlled the institution of expansion falls back into a secondary role. And the example that he gives is in Mesopotamian civilization, the Sumerian priesthood becomes secondary to the Sumerian kings. In classical civilization, this is Greece and Rome, the slave-owning landlords who had been the original instrument of expansion were largely eclipsed by the mercenary army that had been created to carry on the imperialist wars of the Age of Conflicts. So too, the Nazi Party, which had been financed by some of the German monopoly capitalists as an instrument of class oppression, of imperialist war, and of irrationality, took on purposes of its own and began to dominate the monopoly capitalists for its own ends. So on one hand, I think, this is fun intellectual stuff to understand. But on the other hand, this is where the practicality, the rubber of the practicality meets the road.
Yes.
Is we are not there yet. And understanding that these are the points to look for coming out. These are the points to resist. And ultimately, if we want to fix it, we need to come up with a new instrument of expansion that circumvents all this crap. And me and Nima do have stuff to say about that, but I don't know if we're going to have time to get into it today.
Yeah, we have a theory about what that new insert expansion is going to be. And it is already forming, very obviously, in front of everyone. But yeah, so I know that you have to run at some point here too. So
yeah. Well, that would be a good place to lay down the bird here. Or to begin to wind things down is with that teaser there. We can think about what that might be, and you can.
John, how much time you have left? I'd like to at least finish these stages. Stage 4 was by far the most complicated and the longest. Stages 6 and 7 are super short.
Sure, yeah, maybe 15 minutes or so. Does that work?
Yeah, I think we can cover this in 15 minutes. Universal Empires is interesting, but it's not nearly as complicated as what we just talked about with the Age of Conflict.
But just to point out regarding the Age of Expansion, right? This chart looks as though it's a progression that's just one way, right? But Quigley has identified that Western civilization has basically circled back every time they got into the Age of Conflict, number 4, where the insert of expansion has institutionalized and petrified and slowed down. Western civilization invented a circumvention method to make that previous system irrelevant. So we went from from feudalism to England attempting to take over the feudalist West, but then we have commercial capitalism emerging, which puts much more power in the hands of the commercial capitalists. The shipping arrangements, the shipping routes become hugely relevant and all that.
And the institution can't control it, even if they wanted to.
Right, exactly. Yeah. They become secondary. They become subordinate to those. And then commercial capitalism in the expansion phase, Napoleon tries to take control of that system. But the Industrial Revolution lays the groundwork for industrial capitalism, which circumvents that attempt to controlling the system. And so then we have monopoly capitalism, where Germany tries to take control of that whole system. and the globalist capitalist system becomes the new circumvention of that domination attempt. And so every time we went, for like 3 times or 4 times in Western civilization, we've gone from step 4 back to step 3.
As we were on the verge of step 5, like step 5 was just about to happen, and
Exactly.
go back to step 3.
And so our point is that we are on the verge of getting back into the expansion phase. And I don't think it's even going to take very long. Looking at these past experiences of how long these ages of conflict take, it's totally conceivable to me that we could go back into an age of expansion in 2030 or somewhere around then.
Interesting.
Let's hit Universal Empire real quick because Nima was just hitting it.
Yeah.
So I'll see if I can do it from memory instead of reading from the book because of time. So as the society institutionalizes, as we mentioned before, the core institutionalizes before the periphery. The periphery gets wealthier and more powerful because the core slows down, becoming legalistic. And due to all these imperialist wars that are happening in the age of conflict, the number of political units starts to decrease because everybody's conquering everybody else, right? And at some point out of all of this, one society, which is usually on the periphery of the civilization, ends up conquering the whole thing. Right? So Sumerian civilization may not be best example. Like it was progressively like here come the Greeks, here come the Macedonians, not the Macedonians, the another one that started with an M, forgot it. And then at the final end, the Persians conquered the whole thing. In classical civilizations, the Romans end up conquering the whole thing. In Japanese civilization, the Tokugawa shogunate conquers the whole thing. In Mesoamerican civilization, the Aztecs conquer the whole thing. In Andean civilization, the Incans conquer the whole thing. And what happens when this happens is that historians think you get a golden age because the fighting stops.
Okay.
Now, and I don't mean it's not like there's no fighting. I meant within the civilization. Like now, okay, the internal fighting stops and we can send the military out to go conquer neighbors outside of the civilization, right? And you get common weights and measures, you get a common currency, you get common law, and you can transport goods at greater distances. And the historians can look at this as a golden age, and quickly points out, yeah, it's kind of gold, like a peach is too ripe gold.
Okay.
Because the core issue still hasn't been solved. That the instrument of expansion has become institutionalized, and nothing has either reformed it or circumvented it. And when this happens, or I should say, when that doesn't happen, the society begins to decay. And let me go to decay because it's a pretty short conversation. The stage of decay is a period of acute economic depression, declining standards of living, civil wars between vested interests, and growing illiteracy. The society grows weaker and weaker. Vain efforts are made to stop the wastage by legislation, but the decline continues. The religious, intellectual, social, and political levels of society begin to lose the allegiance of the masses. This is super important. Of the people on a large scale. New religious movements begin to sweep over the society. There's a growing reluctance to fight for the society or even support it by paying taxes. Again, I think the Roman civilization is just a perfect example of this.
Yes.
Where, by the end, it's like, oh, there's this Roman ideal of, you have your farm and you participate in the social order, and you go out in a military and you come back and you're great and everybody gives you a triumph. Like, it's just complete replaced by mercenaries on these huge latifundia where, everybody's either enslaved or unemployed or fighting in a mercenary in the army. And when this gets weaker and weaker and weaker, at some point you get stage 7, which is invasion, which is a foreign society comes in and invades, and there's nothing left within the civilization to fight for itself. And it just rolls over and dies. And quickly points out what's important is that civilizations get conquered all the time in earlier stages, but they don't stop being a civilization. I mean, they might get modified, like, the Mongols, they hit Hindu civilization, Chinese civilization, Islamic civilization, Orthodox civilization, and they were on the verge of Western civilization, like Egyptian civilization, just conquering everything. Or I'm sorry, Egyptians was already taken out by the Greeks, and that was part of Islamic civilization by that point, conquering everything. But Mongol culture disappeared. They all went native. Because all those civilizations were still in, somewhere between stage 3 and stage 4 at that point. It's not until you get to stage 6 where there's no one who even cares about the ideals and ideas of the civilization anymore that it gets wiped out. And that is usually a seed where on the periphery of that civilization, you get the mixture which forms into the new civilizations. And again, the Roman Empire is a perfect example because we have 3 civilizations that grow out of it, which is the Western civilization, Orthodox civilization, which is kind of, the Byzantium, Greek, Russian thing, and Islamic civilization. And that is the evolution of civilizations.
Yes, and towards that end, I would encourage people to look up the poem by C.J. McCaffrey or C.P. McCaffrey, I forget, French poet, Waiting for the Barbarians, Waiting for the Barbarians. And the poem is such a thing where the speakers are the Roman people in the square, and they've been told the barbarians are coming, and they keep asking all these questions, but the whole point of that poem, Waiting for the Barbarians, is that the Romans have turned into the barbarians, so to speak. They've lost that core, as Dylan says. They've lost what made them Roman, and it's just this golden husk that's not long for this world.
Exactly. And as Nima was adroitly pointing out, this is not deterministic. That's the hope. That's the hope in tragedy and hope. This is not deterministic. Now that we understand how this goes, and particularly when we recognize the West has done this 3 times already. And Nima and I, Nima's opinion is that we're about to do it a 4th time. And the chances of it happening a 4th time increase when you stop being fatalistic, when you stop being black-pilled about the situation and understand this is part of a natural progression. This is part of a natural progression, and we've done it before. We can do it again. So you use your resources and time effectively to work toward it.
Excellent. Thank you. And that's a good place we can leave it for our next chit chat. And it is interesting that you mentioned you got the black-pilled stuff going on, I say. You have the rapture religious stuff, which is an interesting discussion where all that comes from.
The New Age. Remember the 2012 thing?
The New Age.
Speaking of the Pleiadians are coming.
Yeah, 2012 is such a thing. I came across something the other day. There's a whole idea like everyone died in 2012. It's the most wild stuff. Everyone died, and we're all just slowly in a brain death. I mean, it's just the whole thing across the board is just lay down, Yankee. It's over. Lay down, Yankee. It's over. So that's a good thing. I want to hear what you guys say, and I think the audience does as well. So for our next installment, it was something I'd like to bring up. I've made some notes for next time around. Would be, now that we're kind of in the sandbox here with Quigley, and we have a great understanding with Dylan and yourself, Nima, laying this out for us, an evolution of civilization. Something I want to bring up is maybe and I could add a little bit with my knowledge, contrasting Quigley, who we've met today and in our last talk, with Toynbee and where they have differences. And Quigley mentions Toynbee and his historiography and his differences. And then I'd also be interested if we can talk about some of these dynamics that Quigley lays out and maybe contrast it to and see similarities with classical left-wing theology, left-wing philosophy with historiography, because I'm hearing some similarities, and I'm sure there are certain differences as well.
Well, I'm definitely no expert on Toynbee because I haven't read him, and then I'll have to get a refresher of who exactly we're talking about with what would you say, classical left-wing philosophy? Philosophy,
historiography, even Marxist stuff with some of these stages of history and so forth.
Are the founding fathers classical leftists or classical rightists?
Okay. I wouldn't. I would say neither.
I'm just trying to get an idea of who you mean by classical.
Oh, I mean, like Marx or I know he wasn't leftist, but like Hegel and that whole tradition.
Okay. Yeah.
Basically, materialism.
Yeah.
Materialism. German idealism and
Immanuel Kant sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we can take it into maybe contrasting with Spengler, who Quigley mentions. But
and then there's it's relevant because there's Fabian socialism, which is arguably the most powerful left wing. The movement that runs everything we see today, the whole globalist system, etc. The ideology, it's Fabian socialism, and a lot of the people that Quigley writes about, like John Ruskin, Cecil Rhodes, Milner, etc. They were Fabian socialists, basically. Mm-hmm. The German Social Democratic Party, they're Fabian socialists. They're not really socialists. They want to destroy the existing system by attrition, like the Roman general Fabius back in the day.
Great. Well, that's certainly a good marching plan for our next meetup. So as we knock off, guys, what should we look forward to in the hopper for Irida TV? What are some topics that you have coming up? And when the audience checks out your website there in the bubble, what might they find shortly?
Intellectual self-defense, evolution of civilizations, MMT, economics, and cryptocurrency. Those are kind of our big four.
Awesome. And anything else?
Yeah, cryptocurrency is going to be an important component in our prediction of where we go down the road, what the next expansion phase might be in the context of Quigley's analysis, applying it to today and to the future. And it's good that we haven't mentioned it at all during this talk, because that would have just, derailed the conversation.
Yeah, we got to lay the groundwork first before we can. By the way, crypto's going to save everything with the explanation that we haven't told you about yet. Yeah.
Good. And with that teaser, we'll leave it there. So Nima Mahdjour and Dylan Moore, thank you for your explanation today. And to the audience, thank you for your attention. Do check out Irida TV. And then when you've sated yourself on that after many, many months, you can head over to Apocatastasis and enroll in one of our history classes. Thanks so much to you guys and to the audience. And hang out after we knock off here in the recording, please.
Excellent.
Thank you.